Um,
YouTube videos.
I'll let you know if we need to scroll back. I can see it for now. So welcome everyone. So for those of you in the room, which is one and us, we can go out the back doors and there's exits at either end of the hallway. Are there any agenda changes? Okay. We will keep the agenda as is. So open to the public for items not related to the agenda. Does anyone have any? If you're joining us online, you can unmute or turn your camera on. Okay, and just for the record, in case people aren't noticing, we have Paul Ingalls, one of our members, joining us remotely. And Donna Lieben is at least not currently here, but we do have a quorum, so we're going to keep moving. I think one of the announcements we were kind of chatting about a little bit in that the city council is having their first public hearing on the comprehensive plan, our city plan 2024, this Thursday, the 16th, sometime.
In this building at 6:45 p.m.
Okay. And I have a work commitment, a meeting I have to go to, so I will not be in attendance for this one.
Okay,
So
council is, anyone is welcome to join from the commission. They've not specifically requested commission representation.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Michael.
It's 6:30 Thursday, room 301.
Okay, 6:30 Thursday, room 301. Okay, so any other announcements from anyone? So all 7 of us are here for the record. I don't have any other announcements. Any staff report?
Just a couple of quick items. Last week, I attended, along with our city manager and our community development director, the Vermont Development Conference that took place in Burlington, and there was a lot of really interesting discussion, presentation from St. Albans about public-private partnerships in downtown. The state was talking, state planning department was talking both about recently passed S100, but also about some working with 7 communities around the state around some model missing middle housing concepts of, how could you get some 2, 3, 4 plexes built in the context of those those communities. And so they went as large as Rutland City and as small as a couple of the really small communities. I think maybe Pomfret was one of them, and talking about that, how they can do it in that context. It was really interesting. And my other brief announcement was, oops, I just lost it. Don't recall what it was. Oh, yes. We are expecting in the very near future to be getting the annual offer from the Regional Planning Commission for candidate projects for transportation planning. So every fall, the Regional Planning Commission puts out that communities can submit projects that become largely federally funded for scoping of various different kinds of transportation projects. So, and that will be due in January. Each year, what we do is we bring it to the Planning Commission first, get your feedback, try to give you 2 meetings opportunities to do that, and then bring it to council for their second meeting in January so that they can vote and approve. To be ahead of the ball, staff from various departments started meeting last week in anticipation of getting this, so that at your December meeting, you'll get your first look at it and get to provide feedback. And then we'll come back to you in your first meeting in January with any modifications that you want to make to it. So on track. That's what I got.
That's awesome. And I think along those lines, just we don't have a second meeting in December. So that's not part of our regular schedule. So just as a reminder for those of you who might not have realized that we skipped that one.
Yeah. And we are putting together your calendar of regular meeting dates for next year. We will have that for your next meeting. It is typically the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays, but occasionally it falls on a holiday or something like that. I believe that there is only one conflicted date for you next year. So we would propose to move that to a Wednesday, but we'll bring it to you for your next meeting.
Great, thanks, Paul. Okay, so we can move on to item 5, which is our transportation demand management presentation. We're gonna be hearing from staff on. Paul, was this one of the things that was funded by that funding source you were just talking about with the Regional Planning Commission?
Yes, exactly. So this is one of the projects that actually dates back a few years. And then it was re-upped this year with some additional funding from the Regional Planning Commission. So this is our project that the city, you all sought to do, and 80% of the consulting funding is coming through the Regional Planning Commission for it. But it is our project that they are helping to fund and provide some technical guidance as requested.
Thanks. As Paul just mentioned, this has been in the works for a couple years. So I will explain how this policy proposal fits in with some of the previous efforts and builds on some of those. So transportation demand management, we're actually going to start with a few definitions, which are going to lead into a larger explanation of TDM, or transportation demand management. Excuse me, let me just minimize that. Sorry, folks, I'm not sure why that's still showing up
Because
on.
it's run by a different computer.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. So we're gonna get that moved. Thank you, Paul. So to start with the definitions, we've got the vehicle miles traveled. This is just a measure of how far, how many miles a vehicle singularly or vehicles in aggregate travel. And it's a way of just evaluating how much car use is happening in a certain area over a certain time. Level of service is a term to describe the tolerance for congestion along a street or a road, just a given stretch or an intersection. It's measured in letter grades, from A being, free flowing freeway, down to F, which is like Manhattan gridlock, stop and go sort of stuff. I'll jump to PM peak hour trips, another metric for evaluating traffic. As this says, number of vehicles that come and go from a given location during the evening rush hour, and that's often used in traffic studies and traffic impact studies, which we'll talk about. And finally, there's transportation demand management, which is the main subject, and that's a variety, a myriad of strategies that gel together to broadly shift transportation from single car occupancy vehicles to different modes such as transit, walking, and biking. South Burlington's existing framework for regulating traffic is experiencing some challenges right now, and that's what brings us to some of the changes that we're going to suggest and talk about tonight. What we do currently have is a mandated level of service D throughout the city. This is a pretty blunt tool for encouraging site improvements because it does not include a mechanism for traffic impact studies that aligns with our existing development review processes and goals. It treats every street more or less the same. So Cheese Factory Road, Market Street, and Kennedy Drive are all treated the same in terms of tolerance for congestion, which leads to some contradictory outcomes, as I'll explain in a minute. The other thing that we use to regulate traffic as far as development goes is the traffic overlay district, and that applies on certain subsets of roads like Williston, Shelburne, Kennedy Drive. And this places a hard cap on the number of trips that can come and go from a particular development. And its objectives were to try to maintain free flow of traffic along these, and also to incentivize closing up curb cuts to improve safety and also to keep up free flow of traffic along some of these arterial roads. It has been effective at maintaining free flow of traffic through South Burlington, but it disincentivizes infill development because of that hard cap that it places on expansion of trips as measured in the PM peak. So this is contributing to less investment in some of the areas that we've planned for development, because the traffic overlay district is along a lot of areas that are adjacent to or within the city center, or other areas that have been selected for more development, infill development, and higher density zoning. So, as I mentioned, this study, and Paul mentioned, this has been under study from about 2017. We've been recently working with a consultant to draft a more unified regulatory framework within the land development regulations for, as it applies for traffic management. So you can see this as the next step in a series of actions that the city has been taking to shift away from reliance on single occupancy vehicles. So along with pennies for paths, and some new changes to Shelburne Road, improvements on Williston Road and Dorset Street signals, and of course the bike ped bridge. These are all installments in an ongoing series of actions designed to make single occupancy vehicles no longer the primary way that we expect everyone to get around in through South Burlington. And more recently, City Plan 2024 calls for a 2.5% yearly reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And so we're really trying on all fronts to make a modal shift, but we need more tools to be able to work with people who are proposing development to make sure that their development is that their tools are as flexible as they need them to be, and that we're able to help work with them to achieve the goals that the city has set out. So one of the issues that we're seeing right now is that small projects have outsized development review processes in terms of evaluating traffic studies, and that creates headaches for them and for staff reviewing these projects. And for larger projects, there's very little guidance on how to achieve the standards that we do have. So we're trying to balance flexibility and choice for permit applicants and future adaptability for city officials. And we really value simplicity and transparency review for all parties involved in development review and permitting. So here are the components of what we imagine to be a better regulatory framework. This is the bones of what the TDM proposed TDM scheme would look like. It would look like keeping traffic impact fees, which are already assessed along with school impact fees and other one-time fees for development. It would create a new, differed, and more nuanced level of service requirement depending on the geographic of the area of the city. It seeks to right-size, to scale down the review process for smaller projects, and scale up the review process for larger projects to help the city work more closely with developers, and to give better guidance to smaller, mom and pop and just smaller scale operations, and to create a TDM program that offers people who are doing any kind of development a menu of options to achieve this shift along with the city goals away from single occupancy vehicles. So let's talk about these different components. We have component one, traffic impact fees. These are pooled and put towards capital projects that have already been identified. So a lot of those have gone into improvements in the city center. Also, we're looking at some of the signal improvements and improvements on Williston Road. Staff are currently working on updating that list for the council, but we would continue to assess these fees, and the proposal is to have these fees interact with other parts of this proposed regulatory framework. The second component is the level of service and some changes to level of service and congestion. This would classify roads into different categories and have prescribed ways of achieving that through different mixes of modes. So Dorset Street might accommodate more cars per hour than Market Street, and projects will have a different palette of options for conforming with the TDM regulations that govern how new developments interact with our overall network. And this reflects the fact that there are different amounts of tolerance naturally occurring for congestion on these different streets. I mean, Market Street shouldn't be as free flowing as Williston Road during, given some of the activity that occurs on it, such as, school pickup and drop off, people crossing the road. And that's why I propose creating tiers. Component number 3 would be to right-size, to scale down the review process to match the size of the impact that is being made in proposed development. So this would sort different projects into different categories. We propose 3: small, standard, and large. And then depending on which category a project ends up sorted into, based on its proposal, it would be subject to different and increasing amounts of mitigation requirements. And mitigation refers to an offsetting of the presumed vehicle trips at the peak demand through other means than single occupancy vehicles. So that's transit, walking, biking, or by avoiding the trip altogether through, for instance, through someone telecommuting, or having to, I want to flag one thing here as well. Applying these TDM policies, these TDM options could be under one version of this regulatory framework optional, because something that I'm going to get to in just a second is that we propose that TDM policies reduce the traffic impact fee. So those two will work in concert, and we'll get into that in just a second. So component number 4 is a menu of TDM options. These are the actual physical or organizational or financial activities, site improvements, programs that are being installed or run in order to reduce demand on single occupancy vehicles. So, for instance, a new mixed use building that has apartments on a couple levels and retail and street level might be able to mitigate its or achieve its required level of mitigation through a combination of installing bike racks, through installing sheltered bike parking inside, and perhaps having a car share spot where there's a dedicated car share convenient for use by its residents and other tenants. A small grocery store that seeks to make a small expansion or something like that would probably be able to get away with simply just installing the basic requirements that we already have in our LDRs for bike parking, and thus meet their TDM requirements. So this is designed to streamline with our existing standards, ease the burden for development on smaller installations, and then provide flexibility for larger and more complex and more diverse operations. And it would also create some options for the city and developers seeking to permit larger operations with high demand on traffic and complex operations to use things like CATMA memberships, financial incentives, and other things that work at best at high scale and high intensity and high complexity, that could be applied to achieve some of these TDM reductions that we would require for the larger and more intensive operations. Yes.
Nick, so this is applicable for commercial projects then?
Yes.
Only?
Yeah.
It's
No, not only. This would
So-
be for really any kind of development that gets permitted.
So if there's a housing development, and I can understand how some of these would really apply and they might be used, but how can you, I mean, it's like provide it and they will use it, but you can't know for sure that they're going to use it unless you just don't provide parking. You know, it's like, it's kind of like build it and they will come. This is kind of the opposite of it. Don't provide it and they won't use it.
Well, we do see this as more as an extension of the build it and they will come philosophy, insofar as it incentivizes developers to pick to install physical site improvements that currently aren't being built. We have minimum requirements, but we know that there are better options out there for things like larger bike rooms that might allow for cargo bike and e-bike storage, sheltered bike parking, enhanced opportunities for car share. So by incentivizing folks to go the extra mile and put these in, we're helping to foster the investment in this car infrastructure, which is intended to allow people the option to make that mode switch that they might not have the option to otherwise.
Well, then how would it apply to like Southeast Quadrant residential development where the scale and the density aren't as high?
Sure. Well, let me take so as Nick was alluding to a minute ago, there's both a carrot and a stick component to this. The stick component to it is establishing some minimum TDM measures that need to happen and paying traffic impact fees. So for every vehicle trip at PM rush hour, there is a fee that gets assessed, and under the draft that the council looked at a while ago, it's higher than it was previously. The carrot part of that is that anything that is done in here, whether required or even optional, reduces the number of vehicle trips calculated and therefore reduces your impact fee. So that's one method in which a place like the Southeast Quadrant, they may only be able to achieve a certain number of transportation demand management points. Therefore, their impact fee will remain higher, and then that funds citywide priority projects. In addition, I don't think we're going to get into this level of detail in this meeting, but there are proposed sort of credits for being adjacent to transit lines. So in some ways, the best thing you can do is physically locate your business, your building, your housing near transit service, whether we're already paying several $100,000 a year to support in the city. And so that in and of itself, again, incentivizes future development to take place in the places that the city has identified as being the priority areas. So it's trying to, in some ways, as you know, Donna, building in previously built areas is often more complex. This is trying to turn that a little bit and say, let's make it easier to build in the areas that are and more cost and offset some of those costs by incentivizing building in some of these areas.
Yeah. Does it also incentivize like ADUs and just, very small expansions of existing single family houses in the Shelburne Road corridor, for instance, or 2 blocks away from Shelburne Road?
In the sense that, as Nick said at the very beginning, the very smallest activities, right now, there are some, maybe not on the housing side, but definitely on the small business side. It's very frustrating to go through the current process because the numbers are so small that they don't fit into the models that are national models. And so the applicants have to sort of tear their hair out and say, well, it says that a restaurant expansion of 20,000 square feet equals X number of trips, but I'm only adding 400 square feet. And then they have to have back and forth with us. It's time, it's expense. We're trying to make it so that the smallest things, including ADUs, can be a lot simpler. Say, this is your number. You don't have to do anything other than the bike parking that you're already required to do, and please go build your thing. So in some ways, that's it. And then the last thing that I'll mention, because I don't know if we talk about it in detail here, is not shown on that list, but a possibility is a fee that somebody could pay to meet their minimums. And we're looking at a number that might be 1% of your trip equals $10,000 or something like that. So that for some project that really wants to move forward and can't find a way to do it via this list, that there would be a way for them to pay a fee, and then that could be used by the city to build a project that is meeting it. So, you know, to your question of something unusual that we haven't thought about way outside of a transit route, that would be another sort of release valve to make sure that they are carrying their freight and that the city is benefiting from it.
So it's like a stormwater program for,
A little bit like
cart.
the site balancing that happens in the stormwater program. That's conceptually exactly what we've been thinking about as the model. Okay, thanks, Paul.
You guys, question.
yeah.
Do you guys want questions as you go along, or do you want to wait for them until the end of the presentation?
Oh, yeah, thanks. I appreciate you asking. I'm almost done, so, or I'm getting towards the end. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind holding questions, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So, yeah, so this just gives an overview of how the proposed process would work. Identify a land use type, look up what that was. Paul mentioned some of these international models, and references. That's what we'd be basing some of these on. And also the currently permitted trips, specify and estimate the size of the development proposal, and get a sense of how many trips that you would be required to mitigate for. And then apply any credits that you're getting from proximity to transit, and whichever TDM proposals are sufficient to meet the mitigation required and most appropriate for the site. This is a quick map, proposed map of where some of the areas where the transit proximity credit, we'll call it that, could be applied.
One note on this map before people spend too much time with it. It's a simple map that our consultant put together. It does not differ between when there is transit service every 20 minutes and when it's only twice a day. So when you see Heinsberg Road being in there, it may not be treated in the same way.
Yeah.
They just did a first brush on it. So I don't want anybody to get nervous that all of a sudden there's a massive change in overall city policy.
Yeah.
Say we're cutting in half the big units.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying, Paul. And then lastly, I'll just follow up with another component of this would be for large projects would be required to submit a transportation management plan. And this establishes does a number of things, but it establishes a baseline for the trips that would be generated for future permitting, as well as creates a document that any ongoing inspections or check-ins based on which TDM policies were selected would be done and evaluated. And they just be used as a general tracking document for traffic impact at that site at the permitting point and in the future. So just wanted to put a few questions before the commission on some of the things that we've discussed tonight. We've talked a lot, we've done a lot of back and forth with our consultant on a lot of the details, and there are a number of different potential options for the final product have come up. And at this point, it would be very useful to hear from you folks about your general feelings about this proposal and how how some of these parts seem to interact with each other. With that, I will leave it to you.
Let me just give one last sentence about where we'll go from here. So this is an overview. We gave you a lot of information. We will give this presentation to you to spend some time with. You can give us as much or as little guidance as you want tonight. In the background, we're developing actual regulations to match this. Depending on your discussion this evening, we would intend in the next couple of months to come back to you with the draft regulations. And or if you say, hey, we want to know more at the high level, we're happy to adjust to do that. But just sort of where we're at. Kelsey is working on the 47 S100 material. So we're sort of doing a little bit of, while Nick works on this, Kelsey's working on the other piece, and then they'll come back to you. I'm happy to give you any background also that you want on what's our current rules and what's working and not working in there. We went over it quickly, but I can tell you lots about it if you want to know. So we will now
Tell us a little bit about what's working and what's not.
Well, so the level of service D, so as Nick said, there's two systems in place. We have a level of service D that applies citywide, and then we have this traffic overlay district. The traffic overlay district applies along Williston Road, Shelburne Road, North Dorset Street. The idea of it was that a project comes in, and when it comes in, there's an opportunity to close a curb cut. So with some very large projects, it has been successful. When the when the Goodwill came in and replaced what used to be there of the restaurant that was there. There was an extra curb cut. We were able to remove one and make this a right out only, which improves traffic a little bit. It has often though been more of a hindrance than a benefit, because a lot of projects are incremental in their scale of development, either because they're doing something brand new, but it's not adding that much over what was there before, or they're just doing something small. And in those cases, as Shelburne Road and Williston Road have become, more complex streets, the things that they can actually do that are within the realm of what's affordable to them are just completely outsized. And so, for example, a couple of months ago, the folks at Always Full, the grocery store, said, hey, we want to do a little addition on the back. It adds 4 trips or something. They are at their hard cap, and so the only thing they can do would be to physically change the whole access to the property. That is way more expensive than the project that they're doing. And so what they've said is, let us know if you change the rules. Right now we can't do anything. So that's kind of a lot of the effect. It also means that what we've seen is buildings along Williston Road especially are sort of stuck in their current uses. They can't really evolve into things that might be slightly higher traffic generators. Years ago, you might have remembered there was a restaurant, Two Brothers, Two Friends, something like that, that was near Higher Ground. They only opened at 6 p.m. because there was no way for them to account for the number of trips between 5 and 6 p.m. And so their business was one arm behind the back because they couldn't make any improvements. On the level of service side, the level of service D, the nice thing about it is it's fairly simple and it matches the state agency of transportation. So that is the good side of it. The bad side of it is that there is no guidance given to the DRB about when a traffic study should be required or what should be the policy outcomes of that. So level of service D is completely agnostic as to how you get to it. And historically, for the last 60 years in North America, the approach to solving quote unquote traffic has been to add lanes and widen intersections, which solves it. The science has shown it solves it for a few years, and then there's induced demand. Our regulations currently give the board no guidance about how to achieve that. And so a recent project was O'Brien Eastview. That's the net zero project that's just getting started. The very first version of their traffic study came in, and it was proposing to widen the intersection of Kimball and Kennedy by adding another 2 turn lanes, I think. And we talked with the staff, spoke with the developer, and said this is really not consistent with where the city's trying to go. We just finished this study, the Tilly Drive, Kimball Avenue study. We're really trying to focus on shifting modes, having more connectivity, slower speed. And in this case, the developer said, you know what, we really like a lot of these ideas. They asked their traffic consultant to go back and rework their designs. And instead they proposed more connectivity. They redesigned the first phase of their project. So they brought a recreation path through the whole thing, and were able to demonstrate that that's another way to achieve a level of service. But it was frankly people who were agreeable to do it, not based in the regulations. So this is really trying to set a framework of where are we trying to go, not just, or how do we want to get there, not just what's the bottom line. Is that helpful, Michael, as a little background?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have two other just like technical questions about setting it up. So I think you addressed this. So if a business changes from one thing to another thing, they have to come back to you and get reevaluated? Is that part of the process?
They already do today.
Okay.
Yes, and for the most part, those will fall into the small category, which we are looking with our consultant on ways to make that really much simpler than it is today. Like maybe any expansion or change of use that is less than 20 trips or something is just a generic, or an expansion of less than 5,000 square feet or a change of use in these categories. We're just going to call it X so that they don't have to go through this entire process of proving that they're 1 or 2 trips. Folks today get caught in this thing where in order to prove whether it's 1 or 2 trips, which costs $1,000 or $2,000, they are spending $5,000, which is just, not helpful.
Yeah, so that was my other question, like who's determining the number of trips? It's the property owner or business
So
who's,
today we rely mostly on a book called the Institute of Traffic Engineers Trip Generation Manual. It's this, well, it's now digital, but it used to be about this thick manual that has studies all over the country. It has studies of, dozens of this kind of thing. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Where it fails is in the small projects, and that's what we want to sort of have our own solution to. But it is a objective measure, because we don't want to be in a back and forth of, well, the Olive Garden as a sit down restaurant is this, but Denny's is Y. They provide the same service. We don't want to be in a back and forth argument about an individual business. That's not the point. It's sort of the average of a sit down restaurant across the board.
and just to be like really clear, are you as staff doing that or is the applicant doing
The
that?
applicant is responsible for proposing to say, under this book, we are a fast casual restaurant. We looked up the table and this is what it is. They make that application, and then as we do with everything else, we verify. And if we disagree, then we tell them we disagree.
Yeah, no, Nick, at one point you had a slide with 3 levels
Mhm.
of,
Small, medium, large.
yeah. I guess my question is, I think, Paul, you may have answered a little bit. What's the criteria for determining that?
It's the number of added vehicle trips.
Okay.
So small might be, we're looking at maybe 25 added trips during a PM peak hour, which is sort of
No,
a smallish retail shop might fall into that category. Standard, we're in some back and forth with our consultant, but we're trying to sort of have those be the bulk of the projects that we would see in our community, whether it's a large a medium-sized multifamily building, or it's a new retailer opens up, that they go through the standard process. And then the large might be something like Beta or OnLogic or a large new
Mhm.
neighborhood. And we're still working through, is there a category that's extra large? Nick alluded a few minutes ago to different methods of reporting. So in Burlington, UVM and UVM Medical Center do an annual reporting on all of their methodologies that they do to manage traffic to the city of Burlington. That obviously is a major outlier in terms of how big an employer they are. They spend a couple of months putting together their annual report. That's a very heavy lift, but it's also 5,000 employees or whatever number of employees. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We would love to hear if you have thoughts on that. But that's kind of where we're at right now, and we are developing some examples as to what those different cutoffs would be that we would share with you.
the range.
Right. And then what does that range actually mean? Because I could say 75 trips and that may or may not mean anything to,
Well, and it's more 25 or less for small and.
right.
Okay.
Are there other questions specifically on this before we move on to other questions? It's,
No, I had another,
Sorry.
I had a general question
okay,
about change of use, which wouldn't require any action by the by the project owner if it's in form-based code, because the use isn't an issue. You could change a restaurant to residential or the other way around without having to go back and do a whole lot of legwork.
They don't have to get a change of use, but they do have to account for the trips today.
Yeah.
One thing we are looking at is with City Center and Market Street really now on the cusp of coming together, what's a nimble way of dealing with that? So historically, the closest example that we have to that are things like the Blue Mall, where there's a lot of small retailers, or the U Mall, or where Talbot's is on Shelburne Road. Those get treated as a quote unquote shopping mall. And the way that that works is there's one number that applies to the whole thing. And so whoever comes and goes is irrelevant in terms of transportation, because it's sort of assumed that there's going to be a mix. We've been talking with our consultant about, can we think of Market Street in a similar way? It's not a shopping mall by any stretch, but it doesn't probably benefit the community to be going back and forth and saying, well, this 3,000 square foot space was a clothing shop last week. Now it's a hardware store this week. Next week it became a restaurant. I mean, it's just sort of, that's what downtowns do. We want to be nimble to their chains. So we're sort of thinking maybe we would take the entire block that's under construction right now and say, this is a number for that block. And, whatever happens within that, they can do that. And then maybe the other side gets another block. That's kind of what we're thinking about, is sort of treat it like one user rather than each tenant coming and going being a big.
Yeah, that's the flexibility I was looking for.
And Laurie?
So I have a couple of TDM questions. The first one is, I love the idea of transportation demand management. And I love the idea of trying to move people out of cars. But me as a shop owner who's trying to reduce my quote trips, and I can reduce them by putting in a bike rack, that bike rack doesn't have any guarantee that there are going to be reduced trips at all. So one question I have is, and this is probably more for residential housing than for commercial, but is there any discussion of or mechanism for decoupling parking costs from specifically the housing costs? So the average car park or parking space in a residential project is what, $30,000? That price gets added on to the cost of the unit, which gets added on to the rental rate. To decouple that, I pay less for my rent if I don't have a car. It gives me an incentive to not have a car. Is there any mechanism or way to look at this so that we can, in fact, have a carrot and stick around how we all use our vehicles? As long as my vehicle is cheaper for me to operate and easier, I'm going to use it. But nobody realizes how much they pay every month for the privilege to have a car, even if they don't have it. And if that gets separated, it can really make a difference on the transportation demand management. Because all of a sudden, I don't have a car, I have a free bus pass, and it's a lot easier and cheaper for me to live downtown.
Mhm.
So is there any way to incorporate something like that into the TDM?
Yeah, so first off, we've already decoupled it somewhat by eliminating parking minimums.
Yeah.
So that's one important way that does happen. Of course, parking still gets built at a lot of stuff, and it also exists in a lot of places where you're already paying for it. These strategies, these policies, and I'll just go back to a few of them here, are designed to create the sort of physical infrastructure, really to direct private investment into the physical infrastructure that enables the kind of lifestyle and the kind of concurrent cost savings that you're talking about.
Mhm.
So, there might be a bus stop near where you live, but maybe it's not pleasant to get to. Maybe it's actually completely inaccessible for someone on a walker or wheelchair or something like that. These policies incentivize developers who are doing new development or redevelopment to invest in things like a better bus stop.
Mhm.
well, again, we already require them to put in bike racks. So there is, that's pretty much a guarantee, except for like a single family home, for instance. But on larger developments, yeah, we've already have a sort of a minimum amount that's being done towards that. And this tries to sort of harness that and incentivize private investment above and beyond what the sort of the minimum basic that we require.
Yep.
So maybe you do the couple staple bike racks on the the boulevard outside of your apartment building. But maybe you also achieve a few TDM points by putting in special covered bike parking like we have out here in City Hall, or a bike room that can handle e-bikes being charged in there, or has special hooks for cargo bikes and extra room to accommodate them. These things kind of add up towards enabling the kind of like the kind of mode shift on a more permanent and regular basis
Mhm.
that you're alluding to, that allows people to switch over from using a car.
Specific to your question, I think there's no reason that can't be one of the options as well. And as Nick was going through this, I thought of another one that might be paired with that, which is some multifamily housing has dedicated parking per unit and some has shared parking.
Yeah.
We know that when there's shared parking, there's lesser need for total parking spaces. Even that kind of decoupling might be something that incentivizes, because there's fewer total built, which means that there's less cost that's borne by everybody.
Mhm.
So we could look at, I think, both of those potentially being creditable things. You're doing something to reduce demand.
And if there were a way to actually decouple the development costs of the parking from the residential housing, you create an incentive for the tenant
Mhm.
to actually, oh, it's costing me an extra $150 a month to have my car, to have a place to park it.
Yeah, that's
So I don't know if there's a way to incorporate that.
well, I mean, that kind of goes to the scale of the amount of review
Yeah.
that we it's one of the things that we're looking at. So you can see here we've proposed parking cash out, which is basically what you're referring to. Getting a subsidy in lieu of having a dedicated parking space. But so far, that's really what we've been thinking about that as something for employers. And that's worked in a lot of different places. So we know that would be a strong contender as a TDM option. But I guess we hadn't really considered it for residences. And again, the reason that speaks to sort of the scale and the amount of review, or depends on the scale and the amount of review, is that there is a certain point at which we would start to be overwhelmed with reviewing compliance with TDM, with certain TDM measures. I mean, it's pretty easy to see whether someone's put in bike parking when we do a certificate of occupancy inspection. So physical site improvements aren't really difficult for us to monitor. But and even some stuff of the organizational things like employer's membership in CATMA is fairly easy to verify. But some of the stuff like what you proposed might be a bit more difficult. So our ability to expand those options to include more novel solutions like that is somewhat dependent on choice, some of the feedback that we're going to get from you folks about how far we should, how many options we should allow, and how much time we should be, and staff time we should be able to dedicate towards these kinds of towards enforcement and compliance, because that does take a lot of staff time.
I get it. The last question that I had was peak hour trips really speak to rush hour traffic.
Yes.
They don't say anything about the daily congestion that occurs on Dorset Street, that occurs in various other ways, that all of these projects increase dramatically. And there are many times a day in the middle of the day when I know many people that just avoid Dorset Street like a plague. And is there a way to incorporate not just the peak hour demand metric, but somehow address the everyday congestion issues that are increased by development? So
We could inquire with our consultant about that. There's nothing that says that we need to use the PM peak hour as the metric. The same book that we talked about, Institute of Traffic Engineers, also has daily numbers. Historically, we have used the PM peak hour because that is the highest point. It is the highest point in the day. And so it is dealing with the worst circumstance, with the idea that if you deal with the worst circumstance, with the rare exception of what I said of that restaurant, that you're also improving throughout the day. But, you know, a whole pandemic happened and people travel in different ways. So we'd be happy to inquire with them to say, you know, based on their professional expertise, is it time to think about it in a different way?
and is there a way to address that bigger underlying or big underlying issue?
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Maybe I'm missing some of what you're saying.
I think we're done, but I was just saying, those daily congestion periods can be a real problem for the city that isn't necessarily addressed by the PM peak hours.
So you're saying that even if it were lower at 5 p.m., maybe at noon, it's
Yeah.
still very problematic.
Problematic at school closing time.
And problematic at 3 o'clock when, I mean, there are times of the day when Dorset Street is just untravelable. And it has nothing to do with the PM peak hours.
So you're saying it's your observations are showing that specific to South Burlington, specific to some of our streets. It's not that time of day that's the problem. There's a different time of day that's the problem.
I'm just asking, are we addressing, looking at it globally? I think there are times besides just the peak hour.
Yeah, but in the case of Dorset Street, it's a question of what it's feeding.
Right.
It's feeding the interstate. And other streets in South Burlington don't.
Yeah.
So they don't see this kind of congestion. I go around. I go around
In the
Spear
last few
Street.
weeks, it is dramatically improved going north.
It has, yeah.
3 p.m.
Um,
Thanks to the new signals, but
I had
We'll get a
but
couple
fair
questions up,
point.
Karen.
question about,
Oh, it was specific to what he said? Okay,
have you, oh, go
is that
ahead.
okay? 'Cause it was- Go ahead.
Do you need to go to the mic?
Would you mind? Yeah, just so that Paul and the folks at home, and make sure thank you.
Ryan speaking. I don't know if this helps illustrate a little bit more of what what Lori is saying, but trying to pull off of Brookwood Drive onto Dorset Street, heading north the other day, the turn to get into the U Mall was so backed up at a completely non-peak hour that the traffic in the normal northbound lane had actually backed up across where Brookwood would turn onto it. And once the light did let people through and I turned onto Dorset Street, it wasn't long enough to let the cars through. So there was already a full turn lane queued up. And again, this was completely not a peak time. I realize this gets into other things about, you know, fixing and adjusting intersections as something that might be a possibility with demand management. But I think what Lori's saying about how different areas of the city experience different peak experiences or just overly full periods of time is a little bit more flexible and not necessarily always just that one horrible hour.
Thank
Mike,
you.
oh, or were you gonna respond to
I
that?
was- No, I think you were just adding
Yeah, okay.
context to it. So-
Michael?
Yeah,
And
I
then-
wondered if you'd considered rideshare programs organized by homeowners associations or condominium associations, which might be useful, but I know they'll be very difficult to monitor. Is that something in the menu that you have considered?
I guess in a big picture answer to that, Michael, below that line where it says special options for large development, we're sort of, we're wrestling with what is the scale of project where it is in the community's interest to have annual check-in report requirements, which of course means chasing down the folks for the reports and things like that, to where when might it be beneficial to the community. So if it was, a neighborhood of 10 homes, for example, I'm not sure that them promising to rideshare would actually result in very much. Hold on. Okay. Actually result in a sound is hearing myself there. Actually result in very much, and the legwork to chase down whoever happens to be president of that association. On the other hand, looking at the where Blissby and Larkin Terrace is, they are, proposing a master plan that would include already 7 large multifamily buildings and maybe 5 more. Together, there may be a value at that scale, and where it lies in between that, I'm not sure. And if you have thoughts on that,
Well, I'm thinking of their 3 or 4 homeowners or condominiums in a row. You've got Heatherfield, Indian Creek, Ridgewood, Spear Meadows. It's a huge number of potential rideshare users. But how would you keep track of it if they did something like that? And is it something we could encourage?
yeah, good question.
Donna?
Yeah, I think on the last slide, the top question was, are there some things you might have missed? And yeah, the last one. Yeah, do we have broad enough menu of options? And the thing that was occurring to me is that probably the lowest traffic creator is a multi-use building that has housing and commercial and offices. And I was just, and that would also include very small units, sort of like Paul was talking about the 3-level townhouse where the ground floor is a professional office. There's no traffic generated, on a typical day from that kind of office. So home, office, work, live situations. I think we need to do as much as we can to encourage that, I think, because that, it's like they should get a lot of points, for a multi-use project that includes residential, associated commercial. Obviously, like the building where Blissby is on Shelburne Road, you have residential above, you used to have a movie theater there, which would have been nice to keep that, but
Isn't he gonna build a new one?
I don't know, I doubt it.
Yeah.
You have a couple of services right there and everything, and I would think that would encourage lower parking requirements. And
the ITE manual includes what they call internal trip capture, which is super technical as a term, but it means that it's pre-baked in their charts of, if you've got X% of housing and it's in proximity to, let's say, retail, that you get a 30% credit right off the bat. So the good news is that is that's captured. What is a little bit tricky in there that we'd like to help is, as with a lot of things, the more sophisticated or larger a development is, the more able that they are to read all these parts of the manual and see how they can use it. Smaller scale ones like, there's an application that was just approved to add 6 apartments to the post office building on Shelburne Road. I'm not sure, and they got an approval in the back of the building there. I'm not sure that they necessarily hired a traffic person who sort of understands all those components. So how do we make it simple for the small ones to get the credit? The big ones will know how to do it. But I think to me, that's sort of the challenge, is how do we make it really easy
Mhm.
for the small ones to do it?
Well, and it is kind of a logical thing too.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, everybody knows, like, oh, if you have your housing, I mean, I think someone asked me one time, they had a small Asian restaurant, but they really wanted to build a unit of housing
Mhm.
attached to it. And they said the city didn't let them do it.
Mm.
And I'm sure there were a whole bunch of reasons for that, but I think, we probably should encourage that more than not encourage it.
Yeah.
Particularly if it, you know, I don't know what the reason for it was, but if it was a height restriction or who knows what the issue was, but we should try to figure out what stops that from happening and try to build that into our regulations to encourage it rather than stop it.
So
Absolutely.
do all these buildings on Market Street that are supposed to have commercial retail on the ground floor get the 30% rebate discount right away?
Well, that was something that Paul was referring to from that is built into the manual, that the results of which we are using to make these calculations. So that's not something that we're applying as a reviewing body, as a city. What they would receive would be a reduction in what they have to mitigate by virtue of proximity to transit. And that's one of the things that I think is worth highlighting for the TDM plan, is that it really takes advantage of existing fixed route transit to encourage development along that infill development. That's one of the sort of, you can think of them sort of as a radio dial that you can adjust. That's one of the things that we can adjust is the amount of credit given and the distance from transit that applies towards people's mitigation requirements.
And or just walkable areas. So we could
Yeah.
say, the core of city center is considered our highest tier. Therefore, just by building here, you're getting a 50% credit because we put in millions of dollars in sidewalks, and we're going to be building a $10+ million bike ped bridge over the interstate. We're already doing all those mitigation things. Those are being done. We want this to be the place that people are.
And you could walk to most services on Williston Road or around here anyway.
And are the
Just as I'm curious, do we know how many PM vehicle trips have been added to Market Street with all these new buildings from Allard all the way down?
We will know very
Must be a
soon
big number.
because we, this summer, we engaged a firm to do an update to the whole, the sort of all of city center traffic analysis to see what needs to come next in terms of signals and other things. And that's being assessed in all of that. So, answer coming soon.
I see these questions you have up here. I'm not sure we're ready to answer some of these, like especially this first one, because on the slide where you showed some of the TDM menu, it was labeled that it was just like some of the options. So like, is this
Example
all, this is like example options, right? So
They are,
we
yeah.
probably aren't equipped to tell you if that's a good list or not, like, maybe without. Like, are you,
How many more times are we gonna visit this?
yeah, like how much feedback are you expecting tonight versus like, maybe we'll look at the full list before, like in a packet, and then be able to give you better feedback?
I think tonight, getting a sense broadly of does this, traffic is hyper technical. Do you feel that you've gotten a sufficient intro to it? B, does it seem that this is on the right track of what you're looking to do? Nick's last question, can you go to the questions in there? As Nick alluded to, the transportation demand management, that 5% and the 14% of how many of these menu options, that all the rest of this could be done, and you could choose not to do this at all. You could make that entirely incentive based. You could say you can do as many TDM things as you want, and every one that you do will reduce your traffic impact fee. Or you could do something like what is in here, where for medium and larger developments, you must do a certain amount of them, and then you can choose to do more. That's a policy decision for you all. We think that where we're coming is consistent with all of the sort of broad guidance that we've heard through the climate action plan and city plan, but that level of sort of, is this on the right track, would be helpful. If you're saying, no, like, you missed the boat on this, come back to us. We would love to come back to you with some other ideas before we give you the language. Is that helpful?
I mean, it does tie in with the climate action plan, so I think it's something that needs to be done. And the last question, I can't answer all those other questions because this is a presentation that's very broad, but TDM policies, I think, should be required, at least a minimum requirement for each size of development.
Paul Ingles, do you have your hand up? You can.
No, I don't. I do have
Okay.
some thoughts, but can wait.
Oh, they don't need to wait. You can say now if you want.
Okay. I guess my thought is that we can't promote development and restrict traffic at the same time. That we've really got to start thinking about restricting development. And I think that's question number 2. Should we restrict certain policies to certain sizes or types of development? I don't know that we've given that a great deal of thought, but I would definitely say yes to that question. And I think we've got to start becoming very serious about it, and inconsistent with the climate action plan, and viewing everything through the lens of climate change. I think we've really got to start looking at our development policies. I mean, what I hear is, let's do what we can to facilitate development. Let's do what we can to restrict traffic. And I just think that that's incompatible.
I guess, Paul, you're thinking about a growth management plan, something along the lines of what Williston has, which I think I brought to the council. I was looking at, to the commission back in 2018. That's something that we should consider in the future. I didn't know much about it then, but I did look at Williston's, and if we don't want to restrict, we want to manage growth.
Yeah. You talked about carrying capacity, Michael, right? Michael?
Beg your pardon?
You were talking about carrying capacity.
In a way, yes, it does tie in with what we've got in City Plan 2024. Yes, a growth management would be that kind of thing.
Because I just don't see how, if we continue to approve developments for 125 units, that the suburbanites are going to move here and move into those houses are going to be, bicycle riders. They're going to be, people with, 2 cars and kids to go to sports and all the rest of it,
Okay.
So-
Any other?
In terms of the first question, I think transportation demand management is a really key piece for the city. I would like to see, and I don't know how we do it more, but I would like to see it directly incentivize moving from the car transportation to alternate means of transportation. And I know that some of the impact fees can be used to improve the schedule of buses, et cetera. But I think for me, the focus is, how do we get cars off the street? Not by restricting transportation, but by really encouraging alternatives. And when Paul talks about development, if all the development is creating 2-car homes that everybody's in their car, it's not doing us any good. If the development really incentivizes and creates effective alternative transportation, then it's doing its job. And I'm not sure that the TDM strategies that are up right now really do that effectively.
Two quick things on that. And thank you, that's really helpful, and we'll noodle on that. One thing we didn't talk about, that with our consultant was a decision point a little while ago, is we have talked a lot tonight about PM peak hour trips. And we talked very briefly about how there's impact fees associated with that. We presently do and are proposing to continue to call that a PM peak hour vehicle trip. Other communities in the country call a trip, regardless of whether you walked there, took a bike there, or took a car there. We are intentionally saying it's vehicle trips because with the policy intent of every journey that somebody takes not using a car should be free. So that's part of the incentive here, is that if you can put in these TDM programs to reduce your vehicle trips by 10%, then you don't pay an impact fee on that 10% at all. And so that's a partial component of it. I think there's also, to some of, I think what you're alluding to is, transportation is only one component of this. Land use is just as important, to Donna's point. One of the things that you put in the city plan is there needs to be small scale neighborhood amenities that people have a reason to not drive to. A park, a little store. That can't be solved by transportation management per se, but it gets coupled with, how do we allow for and encourage and incentivize that park, that corner store to be there, so that when the sidewalk is built, that there's somewhere for them to actually go that is reasonable and not a 4-mile walk to get milk, which won't happen. But yeah, that's helpful, and thank you for.
Duncan, and then.
No, I just want to give you a little feedback. As a small business owner, I'm all in favor of anything you can do to make it easier for small businesses if they have situations like that. I think that would be a huge win for the city and the business community on stuff like that, because that's, when businesses run into stuff like that, small businesses, it's incredibly frustrating not to be able to, do something that common sense says, yes, this should happen, and the regulations say, no, it shouldn't. So I think you're on the right path with that part of the program.
Yeah, and hopefully the simplification too, because it sounded like a traffic study of $5,000 to get to.
Not what we want to spend money.
Yeah, I mean, it seems.
I was being a little bit exaggerating there, but
yeah.
the frustration is clear.
Yeah, but that was part of why I asked, like, who is coming up with the trips? Because if you need to hire like a consulting company to, do all this analysis, it's a big deal for people.
So one of the things that the consultant has come up with is a calculator that is that uses Microsoft Excel to it functions as a worksheet, and it would be used to input the values into the transportation management plan that everyone would have to do. So while this would be still required for even small stuff that would fly under some of our minimums or our exemptions, however you want to put it, they would be able to also get through that sheet and fill out their management plan and prove that they are eligible for these exemptions very easily by just using this kind of like this simple tool. It will need to be updated with some of the policy choices that are going to be made in the coming months about the overall scheme. But the idea is to have a pretty simple calculator available for applicants.
And to what we talked about before, the simplest thing that we can do for the small folks is to just make the input decided for them, so that they're not having to, the categories that exist, there's a lot of them, and businesses fall in between them. So, somebody is a hairstylist that also has a brewery, that also sells beer. Well, are they a restaurant? Are they this is the kind of thing that drives the small businesses up the wall to do, and frankly, our development review staff, because they're trying to adhere to the rules. And frankly, for all of these, on the citywide scale, they are minimal in their impact. Whether that hair salon is 4 or 7 trips in an hour on Dorset Street is frankly inconsequential. So what we're looking at doing is just saying, if you're this size, this is your number. You don't even need to make a justification about, are you this or are you that? Are you a hardware store? Just, if you're this small, you're this number. If you disagree, you're still welcome to go and do the study if you want to, but we're not going to make you do it. That's kind of where we're, and by study I mean even just read the book, because even just reading the book means you got to find somebody who's got a license to it. They're an engineer. An engineer costs $500 to pick up the phone. Sometimes civil engineers. To get familiarized with the project. So how do we simplify all that stuff?
Donna?
Yeah, since I've never been part of a big organization, so I don't really know how CATMA works, but I'm assuming that it's because it's regional. It's dealing with employers who have employees who are coming from Bristol, from Richmond, from Milton, from all these other places, and finding ways to consolidate those trips. But I just wondered, because there's so many cars. I just experienced them on Dorset Street and Spear Street, and obviously they're coming from Shelburne, they're coming from points south, but they're not all coming on Route 7. A lot of them are coming on these secondary roads. And I just wondered whether or not that level of coordination could actually help, fund some kind of van pool that actually can stop and pick up people, who, yeah, it's really it's micro transit, but it's also commuters, it's like, these are daily commutes, where CATMA really works, right? That's mainly what they do.
Yes.
It's not for the one-off trip, it's for the everyday trips.
Yeah.
And because it just strikes me that, there's a frustration that, just because the density's kind of, a little too low, you can't get public transportation. But perhaps there are, minibuses or something that could actually satisfy those commuters that live in the southeast quadrant on those routes.
Perhaps there could be. And for an employer such as FedEx or OnLogic that has that kind of scale to organize a van pool, or partner with GMT or something like that, then CATMA would be a great resource to make that happen, because they can function basically as sort of a consultant that works with employers to craft specific solutions for that employer and whatever their unique circumstances are. So,
or multiple employers that happen to have employees coming from the same town, which is 12 miles away or 15 or 30 miles away.
Exactly. And, you could see a scenario where the more employers who are CATMA members, the more efficiency you get, marginally, because you have employers who are able to coordinate through that body, perhaps.
The survey was kind of interesting that a lot of people didn't know what CATMA was.
So we're a little behind. Is there anything else you want from us? We'll hear from Ryan as well. And go ahead. Brian first, I guess.
Okay. I really like that, any way that you can make this more streamlined, faster, or do things in-house that support small applicants, I think is wonderful. I can't think of the other examples right now, but there's a number of other things I've seen discussed at various meetings where if the city were to take some more initiative on the staff level to do things in-house, it could really help the community a lot. I really like, again, what Lori is saying, and it makes me think of the quality of certain things I remember when LEED certification was becoming really popular, that there are a lot of things you could do to get LEED points toward your certification level. One of them is having a shower and bike parking inside, and so you could bike to work and then shower after. But a lot of buildings would put these in the absolute dungeon, like next to the furnace or boiler, and so you end up having to navigate several stories and through a labyrinth. It's not really effective that way. And I thought the city adopted some policy or design standard for bike racks. Did that include sighting location? Yeah. And do we have that for like bus stops yet?
Do you want me to answer the question? So for exterior bike racks, which we call short-term bike parking, we have standards both for the types of them for new ones and also their locations that they need to be near entrances. It's, you know, it's a flexible standard because every site is different, but it says near entrances and spread throughout, so that, you know, a place like the U Mall can't put them all by one entrance. They need to spread them to different places. For interior, we have metrics for when bike parking and when showers need to exist. We don't have, other than they need to be available to all of the users in, you know, in an apartment building. That means maybe in your apartment, or, you know, that's your shower, or, you know, that the bike parking needs to be available to everybody. In a commercial one, it means that it can't just be in one office suite. It has to be available to everyone. We don't dictate where beyond that, other than availability.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to bring that up as some things to consider as the efficacy of what we're asking developers to do, and making sure that it actually serves and really functions for some of these long-term goals, or in network, especially like using the bus. If there isn't a really good, if there isn't good protection from the elements, if it's near a very loud road in a splash zone, things like that can really affect people's willingness to use it. And I think when you, just a local example, look at Barnes and Noble and how there's a seating area, there's a little bit of cover, there's some trees for shade, and also some what feels like kind of structured buffering from the traffic. And then you go over by Trader Joe's, and instead of the plaza side, it's near the Blue Mall. There's really no place to gather except right on the bike path. It's very much in the open. It's not as inviting of a place, and it feels really exposed for the users. And so thinking about that and what kinds of standards you might be able to adopt as a city that make these types of things even more effective upon beyond just the implementation and parsing out of the details of it. Just to plant a bug in your ear.
Right.
So I think the question was, do we have enough feedback? I think we do for the time being, and what we propose is bring this back to the commission for another review mid-January, late January, perhaps, with some draft language and greater specificity on how these regulations would be put into place.
Great.
Anything that's, oh, yes, and sorry, and we in the meantime will be bringing this same presentation to the Bike Ped Committee, and or a version of it, and getting their feedback on the same issues.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so we can move on to the climate action implementation plan for transportation.
All right, this one is me. I'm going to shorten the presentation up a little bit because we're a little bit over time. You received the full report in your packet. And so really what I'm going to be talking about in the presentation is just sort of hitting some highlights of, you know, how did the report come to exist and how are we going to use it in the future. I'm not going to go through each of the elements of the report because there's a lot in there. So if you don't mind bearing with us tonight, is a lot of presentation time, and I appreciate it.
And then
Is this the final
it is the almost final. There is like one or two minor sentences that the consultant is tweaking,
Okay.
but they are really, really tiny changes.
So you're not looking for input from us on things that could change.
Not on the report, but the real work will be actually doing this. So there is many opportunities to do that. This is
Okay.
really the
Yeah, the
Yeah.
guidelines.
You can make some minor comments.
we welcome feedback on how to best achieve all of this.
No, you can't.
No, you can't. Yeah.
So Paul-
It's 8:26
There we go.
already.
Paul, was this from that same funding source you were talking about earlier? This is a
Yes.
very
actually.
transportation heavy meeting.
Yes,
Very
well, we
exciting.
figured if we're gonna talk one thing, transportation, we may as well cover all of it.
Yeah.
So, climate action plan, as you know, was adopted last year, October 2022. And part of the strategy with the climate action plan, and I know a couple of you were on the committee, was to say, we're gonna develop an overall climate action plan, and then within topic areas, develop much more detailed implementation plans, because it's a massive lift. We have developed now 2 of the topic area ones, transportation, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, and government operations, which is the municipality not as a policymaker, but as an actual employer, owner of buildings, owner of a fleet. And that was just presented to council last week. And if commissioners would like an overview of that, we'd be happy to do that too. So this implementation plan is specifically the charge. The mission is identified in the climate action plan. What's the target? All established. This is, and it even had most of the approach, the tactics to be taken. This was now working with a consultant to flush these out. We developed an advisory group. The city manager developed an advisory group of policy, technical, education, advocacy groups to help shape this and give us some feedback on the approaches, and also to help them get some buy-in as to what we're trying to achieve, so they're more familiar when we next call up Green Mountain Power and we say, hey, all this stuff, remember when you sat on the advisory group? Climate action plan, as you know, ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, sectors, building and thermal, transportation, land use, which is the natural areas, adaptation, renewable energy generation, and then, as I mentioned, government operations, which is us. Transportation in South Burlington and Vermont is the most significant contributor. Across the country, it is also the most significant, although we are more so, even both because people drive further in Vermont and because we don't have some of the heavy industries that some other states have that tend to bump that up. Transportation targets, we've been through this in the city plan, but 75% of vehicles with electric vehicles by 2030. Reduce vehicle miles traveled by 2.5% annually, as Nick alluded to, and compact housing to have it so that people don't need to walk, can walk, don't need to drive to all their destinations. We did a survey as part of this, got 269 respondents. There was some good feedback that came in there, including interest in living in compact neighborhoods using Travelit, active transportation modes. If certain factors are addressed, those certain factors include quality of life. They include actual places that they can, destinations, sidewalks. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise to you, because we incorporate a lot of this into city plan also. We took these respondents, which happened earlier this year, and we really Kelsey baked a lot of this in. We also had focus groups with retail workers and with seniors at a senior lunch to specifically, talk with some groups of folks that don't necessarily typically show up. They had they talked about barriers to green technology, physical accommodating different physical abilities in design was a big one. Different languages, etc. So these are the actions that were identified by the original climate action plan. All these topics are really the major focus of this implementation plan. By taking each one of these that were essentially one-liners in the climate action plan and really sort of extruding them into a full plan. You might see the fifth one down there, so TDM. For example, you could consider updated regulations that bring in TDM programs. You know, that's as an example of something that we're already implementing. There were also a whole series of supporting actions. Reminder, high impact actions were the ones that were deemed to be the highest sort of bang for the buck. Supporting actions being other things that would be great to advance that didn't want to get lost, but might not be the sort of first big focuses areas, but they in a number of cases, the opportunities present themselves, and so there's ideas to be advanced. We spent the plan talks about these in lesser detail, but still does address these and gives some ideas on how to advance them. So this is sort of an example as to how one of these works. If you've read the report, you'll see what is in there. So for example, one of the possibilities in there to what Lori was speaking about earlier tonight, or a take on that, is parking management and possibly parking maximums. So the city, the Planning Commission a few years ago decided to eliminate, for the most part, parking minimums. A further tool in there might be to manage parking by separating it out, exactly what you said, Lori, or potentially identifying maximum amounts, which some communities have done. This lays out who the partners would be, what is a potential timeline associated with it, what's the upfront investment involved in terms of staff time, what's the ongoing investment, and then what are some key steps to doing it. So that as we look to, for example, the Unified Planning Work Program, we've got a project that we can say, hey, RPC, we've thought about what this project would be. We would like to go execute this. The cost estimates is really key for the council as they develop their budgets. So in the next, they received this presentation last month. They received, as I said, the government operations this past week. Both of those have total estimates over the coming years as to the capital investments and the staffing investments if the council wants to do all this work and ramp it up in the extent that is envisioned in the climate action plan. So they will be seeing this next month. Next month in their budget for consideration about what does step one of this look like, and what do they want to do in the budget. So this is a small line here, big line for actually doing these things is a substantial investment for them to consider. So we try for each one of these, and then in total to break out how do we assign a dollar value to what it takes to do this. Sort of same thing as what I was just speaking about, trying to help prioritize within the high impact actions for ourselves, which ones should we pursue first, knowing that we can't do everything all at once. And so this was a little metric that we put together. Each one of those numbers represents an action. High, lower cost, lower complexity is great if it has a good emissions reduction. Ones that are very difficult and very expensive and have a low impact might be lower prioritized. So this is just a way for us to be thinking about how to pursue these. And then lastly, we have worked with the Regional Planning Commission on how we will be able to track the actual targets and on an annual or every other year basis so that we can actually see where we're making progress and where we're not on the overall goals. The tricky thing about transportation that I think a few of you alluded to is the decision for people to how they're going to make the trip that they're going to make, or if they make that trip, is an individual choice of each human being every day. And so it's no one of these tools necessarily in and of itself can be directly assigned to say, if we put in, a whole microtransit system, will it actually result in this? One only knows on testing it. Some of them probably have a higher correlation. If every housing unit in the city had EV charging versus every housing unit in the city not having EV charging, there's probably a likelihood that more people have electric cars. We are committed as a city to building out an interconnected bicycle and pedestrian network that appears to have success in a lot of ways, but we know that there's other components, as you've identified in the plan, of there need to be reasonably reachable destinations along those paths too. So this is the tricky part of evaluating this, is it will take some time, and no one of these individually can be assigned to say, well, we reduced traffic vehicle trips because we did item T to 11. It's really a suite, and I think that's what we're excited about out of both the climate action plan and of this this implementation plan. Is it's not really about any one project, it's about a totality and approach to moving the needle. So that's it. I just wanted to give you that. In terms of the various projects in here, like this high impact, the parking management, several of the projects in here, but not all of them, have a planning commission component, either through potential regulatory tools like what we talked about tonight, or some of which might be mandates. Some of them might be simplifications, like how do we make it easier for EV charging to just be installed? Could we say that, or for this isn't a transportation one, but we could say, for example, no permit needed for from the planning and zoning side for putting in heat pumps. So some of the regulations might be incentivizing by simplifying. There will also likely be investment side ones where the council and then you as a lead policymaking group in the city and leaders in our community may have a role to play there as well, in terms of talking about the next version of Penny for Paths or whatever that might be. So there's a lot to come. The scale of how much of this is advanced on a year-to-year basis will be that's in part the dialogue that council will be having in a couple weeks' time around the budget, and how do they want to match all of these, because all of this is some of this is within our potential work plans, like what Nick is working on right now. The scale of it is above what we have historically done. So that is for them, and then ultimately the voters to decide on investments. So that's what I want to give as an overview.
Thermal is going to be the one after this.
That is the remaining one that has not been done yet. Yes. Although I would say that several actions within it have been advanced, but not a game plan for it. Donna.
Yeah, so I spent quite a bit of time reading through this, and especially the part about the EV charging stations, because I just bought one and I'm 0 for 2 success rate on trying to operate a public charging station.
Oh no. Okay.
Just like, this is really complicated, made more complicated by the fact that there are so many different companies out there that have these things, and the information that you get, you know, it's like, okay, there's Charge Point. So Charge Point gives you this map of all these ones. So like I was in Rutland and I kind of gave up after visiting too, because the first one, it was like, okay, nobody told me there was a passcode. I have a password. I don't have a passcode. What's this? So I kind of gave up on that one. Then I made it back to Middlebury and then there was another one there. Oh, this is Green Mountain Power. This is good. This is this EVgo. You know, that's supposed to be pretty easy. Well, I didn't have the card and it didn't tell you, you couldn't just use a credit card. You had to have the card. And I'm like, oh, this is, so what I would vote for is try to develop statewide some consistency with how, you know, how the charging stations work.
I've noticed, Donna, sort of as a corollary to that, that in the last few years, many communities and many businesses on the parking side have sort of coalesced around Park Mobile. So whether you're in Winooski or Burlington on public or private, they're
The
at
parking
UVM,
spaces.
all use the same system.
Yeah.
I wonder whether, you know, this is such a new field that, you know, everybody wants to be in it, and then will it sort
There's
of,
a lot of different companies out there and like EVgo, they didn't tell me about EVgo, but that's actually one that Green Mountain Power puts these stations up and they're the rapid charging stations too. And but that was the one so when I got back, I signed up for an EVgo card because the one I went to, you needed the card, you know. What? Yeah, Green, no, it's from EVgo, which is a California company, but they're the fast charging station that Green Mountain Power has installed in a bunch of different places. And of course, you can't use the Tesla ones because, oh, you only have to have a Tesla to use those. Well, okay, but yeah, it's,
It seems like there's some education and some consistency.
Yeah.
Is needed, is that kind of?
pretty much, yeah, it's just like, or some education, you know, because even, you know, even the dealer, you know, he said, oh, here, you have these two options and that'll get you to most of them and everything. And I'm like, not.
Hey, Donna, a little feedback.
Oh,
You have a home charge.
oh, yeah,
and that's
I
a
took care of
charge-
that right away.
that's a charge point.
That's, no, it's not. It's Emporia.
Okay, 'cause
So it's a
mine-
different one. It's a different one than they were using. So they even changed midstream as to which one they're using.
I was just gonna say, most of those units, and we've run into the same problem, their support numbers are actually really effective.
Yeah, we
And
did
we didn't
finally
have the
get,
card and then they can make it work.
oh, they didn't make it work for us, but they did allow me to figure out how to get the thing off because it was stuck on, it was stuck on there. We're like, oh no, now what? And it's like, oh, you gotta unlock and lock your door a few times, 3 times as a matter of fact. And then it would let you, then it would let it go.
It's a new definition of transportation management.
I was like, I was really glad I wasn't alone. I would have been in tears. And my cell phone was running out of charge too. So it was what an experience.
This is timely feedback because we are set to be working on a set of standards for EV charging at multifamily residential.
Mhm.
And this could be useful to know that there's work to be done
Oh,
for that
well,
and for
then,
public.
then the other thing is that if you go to Stowe, you'll find out that it's 48 cents a kilowatt hour to charge in Stowe because Stowe Electric owns those. And some of the stations are quite expensive to charge at, you know, and some of them tell you when you go onto their their app, some of them will tell you how much the charge is, but some of them don't.
Hmm.
And some of them, there's a set fee, like $2 sometimes just to hook up. And then so much, you know, per kilowatt hour. And it's like, whoa. I had no idea it would be, but I knew it would be sort of complicated because there were a lot of, I've seen a lot of different ones out there. I've been looking around and I've noticed how many different companies there are and different apps and then there's the different, you know, charge point, you know, it's like, oh, that one looks, this one's got 2 on it. And maybe that's what the extra little thing in my car is. And for the rapid charging, they don't tell you. It's like, you know, there's a difference between those two. So anyway, there's my feedback. But all in all, I love it. I'm loving it, but you know, the public charging is a little bit challenging.
I had there's, in my reading that I've done so far, there's a lot of content, but no idea of, okay, we're gonna hire a consultant to do X, but we don't have a sense of when.
So in the report, there is a timeline, a estimated timeline for each of them of, so and the one that I brought up, it said 2025 to 2027. You know, the consultant and staff, you know, we recognize that there may be times when an opportunity presents itself to do one more quickly than another, but it does try to line them up so that they are somewhat manageable from a, you know, we're not peaking in terms of work and then dipping, and that the goal is 2030.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it is
we're-
in there
Yeah.
For a
the
timeline for each.
Table.
Which
Yeah.
is really
But then
soon.
for example, we have the target of 75% EVs by 2030. That's 7 years. I think the market is moving much faster than that. So if there's an opportunity for us to be more aggressive on this timescale, do we have that opportunity?
There's nothing that says that the city can't move faster or slower than what's in here. This
Because
is a,
you know, we
know-
show 13%, but that information currently 13%, but we're way above that by now. I mean, just looking around at how many different new EVs are on the market, you know, 2 models from Hyundai or 3, and the Chevy Bolt or Volt, and what's it?
Mhm.
The other Japanese company that's very popular
Hyundai.
around, yes. Subaru's got one now, Ford has one, Jaguar has one. You see them all, Rivian, I see a bunch of Rivian trucks, Ford F-50 Lightnings around. So they seem to be going gangbusters, and maybe they'll go faster when Tesla finally gets the
market.
stuff in a pile.
EV market is not, nationally is not doing.
No, but just locally, by anecdotally looking around and just looking at the cars in lots, there used to be none.
Yeah.
And now there are a few available.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I certainly noticed a lot, because I was considering a plug-in hybrid, but then I realized there's very few options there for plug-in hybrids. You know, a lot of people are still choosing to buy regular hybrids that are not plug-ins, because by and large, they're more available. The plug-in hybrids, it's like you have Toyota, is basically the only option you have.
Well, probably what I'd do today, Mr. Musk is such an idiot, I would never buy another Tesla.
Well,
so on that note, you have minutes remaining.
we have a,
This is on national.
we have an audience question. Go ahead.
Yeah, referring to what Donna said, does the city have the authority to mandate price transparency on electric charging stations?
So the question was, does the city have the authority to mandate price transparency on electric charging? I'm not aware of that authority existing. It doesn't necessarily mean that we don't. I've not looked into it. I will say that one of the challenges, one of the unique features of Vermont is that we're Dillon's rule state, which means that municipalities only have the authority specifically granted by the state. Which is most states are the other way around. So if we are not specifically granted the authority to do it, then we don't have the authority to do it. So my guess, uneducated, would be that in a subject area like this, there's a high likelihood that we do not have that authority.
So we would need either the states mandate that or charter change.
Or legislative change authorizing all municipalities to do it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. That's a guess though, that's not highly informed.
Paul Engels, you got your hand up?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. Any? Fran, you're looking pensive.
Absorbing it all.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions or comments or thoughts on this? It's very snazzy. I think I'm really pleased that the bubble chart. I don't actually know what that one's called, but it's the intensity emissions benefit intensity chart. I think is really neat that it's like stratified by cost and emissions. And you know, some of one thing I did notice is that some of ours fall into the kind of the biggest bang for the buck 2.8, which is higher density development. So by having more stuff closer to other stuff is one of the best things we can do. So that kind of falls into our category of work. So I thought that was interesting. So yeah. Anything else you wanted from us, or just an intro? So when
I
we
think
start
this was
working
really
on it-
just this has just been completed, and there are many items in here that will, as you see your proposed work plans of the coming few years, this will be the source of a number of them. So we just wanted to orient you to them so that you see what's in here and can start to noodle on how these things fit together. So no action needed tonight. Just wanted to make sure that you're all feeling oriented to all this great work to come.
Donna, sorry.
I'm just wondering if I can ask Paul an unrelated question, because we had a discussion over the phone about number of levels of housing and elevator requirements. And I was just wondering if you had any feedback from the fire inspector, from the fire marshal. Or whatever.
So at your last meeting, well, you and I did speak, but also at your last meeting, you talked about sort of what are the thresholds of elevator requirements. Not yet, no, but we will have it to you before we talk about the subject again.
Yeah, I actually found a set of the plans of that development that I showed you.
Oh, great.
It's not a full set of plans, but it does give you a section. So it explains a little bit more about how it's actually 4 levels, but it's 3 levels from grade.
Please feel free to share it. Love to see it.
Yeah, afterwards, if anybody
I
wants to
think
look
she's
at
got it. Okay, are we ready to move on to the meeting minutes? You're allowed to vote. Okay, so October 24, 2023 minutes.
We need to move it.
Yep.
Move to approve minutes of October 22nd.
A
Very,
second.
very good. Any discussion?
I noted one place where I think I was misunderstood or misquoted or something. And where is it? It's on page 2. Pretty sure it was at the bottom. I don't know. I wasn't able to circle it, but somehow it had me saying that buildings with elevators were ugly, and I don't think I said that.
You did say that the buildings with the interior corridors you didn't like.
Well, but I didn't mean they were ugly.
No.
But I didn't know if it was, as appropriate. And Paul and I, one of the things we did talk about is that, pandemic related buildings with, one entrance for a lot of people are really to be avoided during pandemic times. So I think we need to be pretty cognizant of that and develop housing units with fewer houses per entry point, if possible, for the future inevitability that we're gonna face that again. Hopefully. So.
Okay, any other discussion on the minutes? Okay, all in favor? Aye. That was unanimous. I saw Paul waving his hand around on the screen.
That's correct.
Very good. Okay, then I think was there
I
some,
would like just to,
we have other business for a second.
yeah, it's
it can be other business, just something that will be of interest to us.
Okay, we'll do it now.
Okay, I just read today a statistic that the amount of walking done today, post-COVID, is between 20 and 36% less than it was pre-COVID, which is entirely counterintuitive for me.
And across the country.
Yeah.
With some blips, but
It blew my mind.
So
I thought it would be exactly the opposite.
just like walking for all walking?
Well, doesn't that have to do with people like not wanting to use public transportation, which also includes a lot of walking, you know, whenever you're using public transit. Well, people pre-pandemic would have used public transit more.
But they walked more than they do now.
Right.
Yeah, she's saying it's
Using public
because
transit.
They're
you're,
using public transit less than they would have previously, yeah. I mean, that's kind of consistent.
well, that's not great news,
No.
is it?
Not for what we've been doing.
On that note.
mandate walking.
Yeah.
That's right.
Even with all the like
Can we regulate that without a
Fitbits
climate
and
change?
Apple Watches, and I mean, people know too more than maybe they used to, so
Are they including treadmills?
I don't know, oh goodness.
So that isn't great for their individual health. I hope that
Mhm.
through this, maybe people are, you know, if you work from home one day a week.
That's true.
now. But it's still not good from a public health perspective, but
Mhm.
Yeah, yep, when I go to the office, I do a lunch walk, but I don't always do it at home. So,
Well, there was one-
Oh, any
Don't have-
other business? Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank
happy
you.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.